John, if you have a question, we can start with you. Take it away, John.
Sure. This is just to get your level of expertise on this. I have a son that's senior right now, so we've been going through a lot of this process. And some colleges are very open and have it published right on their websites what their their own little scholarship offer are. If you score this or if you have this GPA or whatever, there's different diagrams and everything that are very open with it. In other colleges which to me seem like they're very comparable with average test score ranges and stuff, are very secretive of that, and they hide that well. And um, is there any leverage that a parent could have in looking at or seeking that information, or is that something that we don't that parents are is that hidden for a reason by some schools and not by other schools? It's just very confusing that they all do it a little bit different.
Yep. It is confusing. They do it on purpose. And quite clearly, the ones that don't show a grid do it because they want you to be confused, because it's to their advantage for you not to know how things work behind the scenes. Now, it may well be the case that the schools that don't share are engaged in what they refer to as holistic assessment of merit aid. So what they want you to think is that what's going on is that they're sort of huddling up on every accepted student, and after having spent a number of minutes deciding whether the kid should get in, then they also spend a number of minutes sort of spitballing merit aid offers, and then that goes into the acceptance letter. In fact, those consultants that I spoke to you about, they all provide the schools with sort of off the rack grids that are similar to the ones that you see often at public schools, but at some small privates, where you'll see, oh, my kid has a 3.9, adjusted, unadjusted. They've got an ACT of, 29. So you look in the grid and this is what they get offered. And the schools that don't publish that information are almost certainly working with some sort of grid in the background. Sometimes what they will do is at the same time they're deciding to admit your kid, they're grading the kid according to the assessment of the kid's ability to pay, and then an overall academic quality. And then there may be a third element that has to do with we're all out of trombone players, right? And this kid was, all state in the orchestra. So that may get thrown into the mix. And then they use their own grid in the background to just, put a number into your offer, and you never get to see what the grid is. And then there are some schools that, may do it in a bespoke fashion. But I agree with you, that's incredibly frustrating. So what happens if you're looking at schools that won't tell you or that don't show you on their websites how things work? There's no grid on the website. Well, there's a number of things that you can do. First of all, every school by law has to have something called a net price calculator on their website. So you just Google, Knox College, Galesburg, Illinois, net price calculator. And you go over there and you input a bunch of information. And if that calculator exists to help people who have financial need predict what the school might offer them if their kid was to get in. But many schools, or some at least, will often do merit aid predictability with their net price calculator. So how do you know whether a calculator is doing that or not? Well, if it asks you for the kid's GPA and scores, then you know that it's making some sort of merit aid estimate. Okay, so you've tried that. Maybe it isn't doing that. So the next thing you can do is you can go to the admissions office and just say, hey, super interested here. Money's going to be a factor for us. Could you do a merit aid pre-read of my file, right? And a parent can make that ask, or a kid can too. It's usually better if the kid makes the ask. So what is that, right? So before you've applied for admission, the school will, take a couple minutes and, do a scan of the GPA, of the transcript for, sort of strength of schedule, look at the test scores and any extracurriculars. And then they'd come back to you and say, yeah, if you got in, you would get $26,000 off per year. That's our minimum estimate, might be higher. So there are schools that officially offer that as a sort of marketing tactic. Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, a great small liberal arts college, does it. College of Worcester does it in Ohio. And so you lose absolutely nothing by going down to Knox or, up to Lawrence University in Wisconsin or whatever and saying, hey, I see that Whitman and Worcester do these merit aid pre-reads. Will you do one too? And then, let them uncomfortably say to you, no, these peer schools do this, but we won't, right? And if they won't, you can say, well, there are other people in the marketplace that'll do that, and I really wish you would. And tell them Ron Lieber sent you. And then there's one more thing you can do. Most schools publish something called a common data set. It's a couple hundred pieces of data, all of the data basically that US News asks for. They put it together in a PDF, and most people never see it. But my readers see it. They know to look for it because they know that in section H2A of the common data set, you can learn how much merit aid on average gets offered to people who don't have any financial need. So who doesn't have financial need? Well, for a private college or university, you don't have financial need if you earn more than $250,000, $300,000 a year in your household. But line H2A will tell you what the average merit aid amount is and what percentage of the people get it. So, you can begin to back your way. You can begin to back your way into this number, but as you've learned now in the last 4 minutes, it's kind of tedious. But again, that's how they like it, right? Because if you're operating in a competitive, sharp-elbowed marketplace, you want to retain any information advantage you possibly can. Because the difference between, you paying 32 versus 29 multiplied over, 1,000 first-year students, is the difference between being able to retain 4 faculty members or having to fire them. It's real money, but also for you.
John, if you've got another question, hang on to it because we're going to take one from the Q&A. Linda wants to know, what do you make of the strategy of other states to offer in-state tuition to Illinois students?
If I was, so I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of that state. And if I'm in the shoes of that state, I'm aware of the fact that, the rack rate of the University of Illinois, all things being equal, is, up there in the most expensive 20% flagship state universities in the United States. I feel like it's well north of $30,000 per year now, maybe even over 35, right? So if I can offer a better deal at the University of Minnesota, and I can bring people to Minneapolis, which, maybe the most underrated city in America, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to take my shot, right? Especially if, my school is sort of underpopulated, right? So the question then becomes, all right, well, what can happen up in Minneapolis that can't happen at Champaign-Urbana? And that's something that you can only figure out through shopping.
I know you have 2 daughters. Many of the people listening have high school students. What is your elevator speech, imagining your kids are in high school? Help the parents who are listening. What do they need to say? Short of, they're going to buy your book. Everybody's going to, there's no question. It's all there in great detail. But what's a short conversation to have, some points for a parent to address with their high schooler now?
About college generally, or about paying for college in particular?
That paying for college.
Yeah. So I guess there are 2 things that I wish more families did. Hopefully at the end of 8th grade, really. Because once you start high school, you're beginning on this treadmill, right? And you're, kind of establishing a record for yourself. And so you don't want to start having these conversations 2 years in, after they've already sort of established a paper trail that they may or may not be able to recover from, or may not put them on the trajectory that they need to be able to afford college. So what do I mean by that? Well, I guess what I would suggest is that, you sit down with your kids as soon as you can and say, look, we have this much saved for college. We can afford this much out of current income. We are willing or able to borrow this much. And you will be able to qualify for $31,000 in most instances of federal student loan money over the course of 4 years. These are the parameters. And maybe all of that money adds up to $401,000 and they can go to Vanderbilt and it's all hunky-dory. Chances are it probably doesn't, right? So if there are restrictions, what are the restrictions? And if you're going to say something to them like great or state, then you best start defining as soon as possible what it is that you mean by great. And I really hope that in the course of doing that, you're doing it with an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of each and every one of the 200 or so best colleges and universities in America, right? Because every one of them is great or can be for many kinds of students. And I really hope that you're not relying in your definition of great on your vague recollection of what it was like, to visit Colorado School of the Mines in 1994, right? So, if you sense some like tough love or cynicism here, let me just tell you that I am a semi-professional, and I felt like my proper role when my kid was in the pipeline, my older kid, was to, approach this with an attitude of aggressive humility. I know what I don't know. There's some things that I don't know that I don't know. And I'm going to make no baseline assumptions here. Other than that, every institution, within reason is worthy of consideration. And we should go into each of them armed with very pointed questions.
What is the most most asked question that you get?
Uh, I think, in the world of money, the one that comes up most often is, um, I I keep hearing about these merit aid discounts, and there are kids who are getting them. There are kids who got them who are a year above my kid, who are not very good students, right? And so, what does my kid have to do to get it? I'd say I hear that one quite often. And then the other one, that I think that I hear most often is sort of like a broader question, which is like, well, how am I supposed to know if Vanderbilt is, $300,000 or $250,000 better than the University of Illinois? Like, where do I begin to extract granular idiosyncratic data that applies to me and my family? And, there it's sort of harder to give a pat answer. Is your kid interested in computer science? Is your kid a singer? Does your kid want to be an investment banker? Is your kid an athlete? And does your kid want to go to a PhD program, right? And as you begin to drill down there, then you can say, oh, okay, your kid wants nothing more than to be a history major. Well, if you're a history undergraduate at the University of Illinois, you may never even meet a professor, until your junior year. And then those classes might be very small, right? At Vanderbilt, you're more likely to have access to, sort of high octane scholars. And oh, by the way, did you know that there's a federal database that tells you, for all of the history PhD students in America, here's the list of what undergraduate institutions they all came from. And you can go down and you can do a per capita search. And you're like, oh, wow, I had no idea that a disproportionate number of history PhD students came from Grinnell, right? And it turns out that Grinnell offers a lot of merit aid, and so it may actually be $100,000 cheaper than Vanderbilt and only $50,000 more than Champaign. And pretty soon your list starts to kind of resort itself. Um,
Mhm.
so people have questions like that.
Interesting. Here's one that just came in. Are merit scholarships taking away from the pool of aid so there's less need-based aid given out by a school?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer to that question is maybe, and it depends. Um, I think it's easier to respond to that, in a more pointed or critical or skeptical way by looking at certain state institutions, right? A state university, at least in theory, is there to help in-state students, preferably lower and middle income ones, right? Or especially lower income ones, help in-state students get a leg up and keep them in the state. Um, about 15 years ago, when the University of Alabama was facing, enormous budget cuts from its state legislature and declining, federal assistance during the Great Recession, decided that it was gonna, take a page out of the Ohio playbook and start effectively buying good students from out of state. And it had some, good resources to work with. I mean, it's a beautiful campus, an incredible football team. We all saw, on our kids' social media feeds during the pandemic, what was going on, with Rush Talk down there. They were clearly having a lot more fun in late 2020 and early 21. The kids were having in the Midwest. So they had some good resources to work with. And basically what they did was, they raised the out-of-state tuition, kind of sky high, and then started discounting it on a basic grid basis. And the better student that you were, the better scores you had, the more of the discount you got. Now the discount rarely got to the point where it was the equal of the University of Illinois. But as some of you may remember, Alabama bought so many students away from Illinois so quickly that the state legislature in Illinois met in special session to create a $25 million fund that came from taxpayers to effectively buy these students back, right? To keep them in Illinois with their own merit scholarships. So what does this have to do with equity? Well, in the space of like 5 or 10 years, when you looked at the data that the state has to make available by law in Alabama, of their, giant pool of grants and scholarships that they gave out, it had gone very quickly from like 10 or 20% of it going to out-of-state students to more than half of it going to out-of-state students, right? And who has good grades and good scores on average? Affluent kids, right?
Mhm.
And so, if I'm in the Alabama state legislature and I'm representing a low income district, I'm like, wait a second, right? Why are we buying rich kids from, Highland Park and Hinsdale, never from your school, and sort of bringing them down there? What is this, right? This isn't right. Now, if you talk to private colleges about this, they bristle a little bit. And the ones that are, sort of better endowed, I mean, I remember a very pointed conversation I had with a guy named Brian Rosenberg, who was the president of Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, for a long time, and a well-known person in the industry. And he said, when we went to Merit Aid, we made sure to keep an eye on the numbers and to make sure that there was no impact, no decline in the amount of need-based aid money that we gave, right? So how does this happen? Well, sometimes the need-based aid money comes from the endowment. Sometimes some of the merit aid money comes from the endowment. But quite often what's going on in these institutions, at least in a perfect world, is that there's a kind of cross subsidy, right? So particularly at schools that are, sort of tuition driven, right? Where their endowments aren't so big that the endowment can really help with this, right? Imagine a pool of 1,000 students each year. If you've got 200 of them paying $60,000 and you need $40,000 in revenue per student to keep the lights on, those 60,000 people, those students paying 60 can cross subsidize a whole bunch of students who are paying 20, right? And so depending on how the math works and how carefully you target the offers, you end up in a kind of soft landing spot where the average student is paying 40, but a lot of people are qualifying for need-based aid. Um, and the kids who are paying 60 may actually feel great about themselves because the list price is 80, right? So they've gotten a $20,000 presidential scholarship. Everybody feels like they're getting a pat on the head for being meritorious. But those people who are paying $20,000 less than the list price are still cross-subsidizing other people with lower income. So every school has kind of a different mix. But you're right to ask because most of these schools or these financial aid officers and admissions people, when you get them 3 drinks in at midnight at the National College Counselor Conferences, which I do, they'll say to you, Ron, please keep doing what you're doing. We can't fix this without an antitrust exemption. We can't all just like sit down and decide together to lay down our arms. But if enough people learn to beat the system, eventually it'll break, and then we'll replace it with something better.
Mm. You've got a specific question about arguing or having those conversations with the school. Well, I'll ask the specific. Well, you go first. Give us a general about talking to the schools to get more.
So after the offer has come in, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah. So the thing to realize about this is at the start is that, a lot of like TikTok videos or whatever will refer to this as bargaining or negotiating. I would encourage you not to approach it that way at all. Of course you want a better price, but remember what I said earlier about aggressive humility. I think that applies here too, right? So what I suggest is that, if it's merit aid we're talking about, it's admissions. It's the admissions office that does, the merit aid awards and the merit aid packages, not financial aid. And so you go back to admissions, and there's probably somebody in that office who is the sort of representative for your part of the Chicagoland area. Maybe they read your kid's application. They may have assigned the grade or the score to the overall package that caused you to get 17,000 versus 13 versus 24.
Mhm.
You just go back to them and say to them, ideally you're in a situation where you have another offer from a comparable school, right? So, your kid's gotten into McAllister. They've also gotten into Oberlin and they've gotten into Grinnell, right? And they really want to go to McAllister. And they didn't get any merit aid from McAllister. They didn't get very much, right? But they got, 20 grand from Oberlin and 26 from Grinnell. So you go back up to St. Paul, maybe you do it in person if you're like really serious about this. Then you get in the office and say, thank you for talking to me. I realize that your time is really valuable at this time of year, and I know a lot of people are coming at you. And so we really want to keep this short. McAllister is our first choice. Right now, the net price at Oberlin and the net price at Grinnell are going to leave us in a position where we're paying, close to $100,000 more over 4 years at those places than we are here. And we're here to sort of prostrate ourselves before you and ask, did we do something wrong? Right? Not you did something wrong. What the heck is wrong with you? Why didn't you see the value of my child? Give us the damn money. No. What is it? Did we do something wrong here in the application that we could possibly correct at this late stage? And oh, by the way, right, it's been 4 months, since the application went in. And here's all the amazing things that, I or the kid, has been up to for the last 4 months. Just so you know that they haven't been slacking off. Is there some possibility for a reconsideration here, right? So, you're not putting them on the defensive. You're going in operating under the assumption that it must have been something that you, the non-expert, did in the application to, cause a suboptimal result. So, let's have a conversation about how we, the family, I, the student, the applicant, can fix whatever I did wrong, right? And maybe you did do something wrong. You probably didn't, right? It's probably the school that just got its formula out of whack, but everybody likes to be told that they're the first choice. And what you can't know on March 27th or April 4th or April 29th in particular is how hard up a school is at any given moment. And if it looks like they're not going to make their number, if they're behind, right? Um, they may be in a position to offer more money even to somebody who already got a pretty generous package. So it doesn't hurt to try. You absolutely should. Just be super nice about it because a lot of people won't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. So here is that specific question. Is it beneficial to tell an out-of-state college the amount of merit aid local colleges are willing to give to negotiate for an increase in merit aid from the out-of-state?
Sure. As a general rule, state universities, and I assume the out-of-state university is also a public one. The public ones have a little bit less leeway than others, but you can't always know, and you can't win if you don't play, right? So you lose nothing except a little face by making the ask, um, and uh, and nobody's going to look sideways at you for having tried.
What do you think is the biggest mistake families make around this issue?
That they don't have the conversation early on, number one, as we
Mhm.
discussed before, about ability to pay and willingness to do so. Um, but then when they go shopping for schools, um, uh, they do not seek out research and hopefully, if they're able to, visit at least a couple of schools that are, sort of financial safeties, right?
Mhm.
Schools that might offer a lot of merit aid or schools, that you could, clearly afford with the least amount of strain. Because, the challenge that I see, many families in your particular demographic come up against is that the parents have learned, a little bit about merit aid, or they've heard that, oh, nobody pays full price. And so, they go out and their kids, apply to a bunch of, reaches and maybe schools, right? And they apply to 10, they get into 3, and they don't qualify for any need-based aid. They get no merit aid or very little. And then all of a sudden it's April and like the parents are like, whoa, we can't afford $74,000 for Syracuse. And they won't give us any more merit aid. And oh, geez, like we're gonna have to, yank $150,000 out of our home equity to make this work. Whoops, we didn't see that coming, right? You don't want to be in that spot because then you're likely to go to the federal government and just borrow the $150,000 and yank the equity, and then you're still in debt at the age of 78. Um, I would venture to say that there are lots of amazing private universities where your kid can have just as much fun as they would at Syracuse and do it for 48,000 instead of 78. But you've got to do the research and the homework and the visits and apply to some of those financial safeties in order to have that choice in the first place.
Mm. What's a question that comes to you from families where there's a divorce in the family? What question do they have?
Yeah. So how is the school how is the school going to treat my spouse if they have said my ex-spouse if they have said uh that they're unwilling to pay? And that's a question that I always suggest that people put to the financial aid office, right? So for need-based financial aid, you're talking to the financial aid office. For merit aid, as we discussed before, you're talking to the admissions office. So Some schools will uh, treat the situation a little differently depending on the unique circumstances of your individual family. But as a general rule, they don't want to let, these non-custodial spouses off the hook just because, the ex has the money but doesn't want to pay, or there's, basic baseline estrangement. They feel like there's a sort of fairness issue there, as much as it may feel unfair to the family. So want to know at the earliest possible moment exactly how schools will deal with that, because there may be a many months long or years long process of trying to come to terms with your ex about just how much that person wants to potentially punish their child, um, uh, through their stance on the matter.
Mm-hmm. The book is fairly new, but from the time that you wrote that book to today, what if you were right? What's changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, what else? What would I put in there today
Mhm.
that I didn't have in there when it came out? We talked about the things that people shop for. Um, I feel like in putting together that list, I may have missed a fourth because I didn't do as much reporting with students as I did with parents, or as I should have. I think we need to be realistic about the fact that all sorts of 16 and 17-year-olds are shopping for a damn good time. They are, they are paying for the party, or they want you to pay for the party. Um,
Mhm.
they want you to pay for the tuition and pay for the dorm and pay for the keg and pay for the car and pay for the road trips and pay and pay and pay and pay. And you know what? You want to pay for the party? Great. I'm not passing any judgments. I want people to go into this with a clear-eyed sense of what college is actually for, right? What
Mhm.
is it that we're shopping for anyway? And among this if there's one or two or three of you or more, step parents and grandparents are involved, right? Can we work out our differences, preferably before the shopping process starts? Um, there may be circumstances, right? So somewhere out there, there may be somebody who owns the local funeral home, right? Um, and they're going to get all of the training, all of the brain building they need from their family members when they immediately go to work for the family business. In fact, they're probably already setting up funerals and passing out programs, starting in middle school, right? So they don't really need to learn all that much of anything in college. They're going to learn what they need to know uh, at um, at the family business. And the credential doesn't matter because they're going to get hired into the family business no matter what, right? But the kinship, now this, right? This is something that may matter, right? And so basically, the question for that family might be, where uh, can my kid go to college where they're going to meet the largest number of middle and upper middle class people who are most likely to end up settling 5 or 10 years from now within 10 to 20 miles of where our funeral home is, right? And how can our 18-year-old become best friends with as many of those people as possible so that when they come back to town and their parents and their grandparents die, they're going to remember, the kinship they formed with our kid, right? So for that family, your pie chart looks like, right, 50% kinship, 50% paying for the party, largest Greek life, biggest concentration of affluent kids from my community. That's what's going to serve the kid and our family best, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. I just want people to be totally calculating and brutally honest with themselves about the point of the exercise, right? What is the definition of success here, and how much is enough?
Mm. A minute ago, you talked about the family who has the eighth grader and how important it is to start that conversation. What is one thing that a family with a child that age should think about in financial planning for the future?
Sure. I mean, one thing to think about is, how many more or are coming up behind you, and what is the definition of, fairness in your family? Because some kids may pursue higher education that's more expensive than what other kids want to do. Some kids may want to go for graduate or professional degrees. Some kids may not go to college at all. Some kids may become carpenters or electricians or plumbers and may not need to spend anywhere near as much for their training, right? So, what does fairness feel like in your family? Um, uh, that's a pretty important financial planning question. Um, I think also just having a relatively detailed knowledge of all of the borrowing options that exist and like sort of the pluses and minuses of each one. Um, I think that's a pretty important planning question as well.
We're getting close to the end here. In your conversations with your girls, are you planting seeds now for being savvy about this? Are you backing off? What are you doing with them?
Um, yes. So let's see. So our youngest was 9, and she has vague awareness because we talk about it every time the 529 plan statement comes. She has vague awareness that um, that we are saving, and that we're going to do our level best to make sure that she can go to college if she wants to, and that money will not be a factor the way that it was for me. That has always been my goal.
Mhm.
Our big one is already there. Um, we had the same conversation with her, and so far, she just started, but so far it's worked out that even though she's going to a school that does not offer merit aid, it looks like we're going to be able to pull it off with the proviso that she maximizes her undergraduate borrowing from the federal government, which is at a very reasonable rate compared to what normal rates are in the marketplace, and that she works for her spending money starting in the second semester of her freshman year, so in January. So far, that's working out. And we made those expectations clear to her, at the beginning of her senior year in high school. And we had the conversation with her after eighth grade to let her know, hey, this thing called merit aid exists in the world, and it may allow us to spend less and maybe even have some money left over. If you work hard in school and do well. And we don't want you to feel pressure, but we also don't want senior year to come around and for you to say to us, "Why didn't you explain to me that there are all these discounts available? Um, how could you have hidden that information from me?"
Mm. So have the conversations early. These are really important conversations, and you've really guided us to how best to do that. I can't wait to see you back again this evening, and we'll do this all over again. Everybody who's here, and we still have so many people here, make a phone call and let a friend know, a family member know. We have an expert here today. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Ron. Pleasure.